You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Welcome to the show, my family and friends. The Chris Voss Show family loves you but doesn't judge you. At least not as harshly as when I haven't had my coffee in the morning. Because if I have my coffee in my morning, I'm very bearish and very, I'm just ornery. I'm coming out of hibernation from the night, and I need my coffee. And if you mess with me, people will die. So just remember, if you're in the Chris Voss Show family podcast, you're not in my family, you're in my podcast. But if you happen to be wandering out of my house in the morning or the office, make sure that I've had my coffee first, because I will judge you. But until then, we won't. So there you go. As always, folks, that's our lead in to remind you, and guilt and shame, to give us a 5-star review on the iTunes there. We love it when you do it. I usually sit and weep silently in happiness whenever someone gives us a 5-star review over there. It tells us how much they love us. And I just go, my God, people love me. Also, for the show to your family, friends, and relatives, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, linkedin.com/Chris Voss. Subscribe to the big LinkedIn newsletter, the 130,000 LinkedIn group over there. Go to TikTok. We're starting to be cool over there. TikTok/Chris Voss 1 as well. And I think I mentioned YouTube. You guys know where it's at. Just go do it. Enlighten your friends, neighbors, relatives. You're only as smart as the 5 people that surround you. So if the 5 people that surround you don't listen to the show and you listen to the show, I mean, yeah, you do have the benefit of being the smartest person in the room, but seriously, they're going to drive you crazy unless you get their IQs up. So get them involved in the show. We're going to be talking about leadership today, and it's one of my favorite topics. After writing my book, Beacons of Leadership, and owning companies since I was 18, I've done a few companies, and leadership is important. And it's not just being a CEO. Parents are leaders. There's everyday leaders that surround us everywhere. But we're going to be talking about some things that gave me an epiphany with this gentleman coming on the show that opened my eyes to a few new things about leadership and how to be a great leader, regardless of what you do and how you apply your leadership, whether it's being a great mom or dad, or whether it's being the CEO of a $50 trillion company, or being a great entrepreneur. So I think you're going to be really surprised and interested in what he has to offer. And we're going to be talking to him on the show about all the good stuff. So we're going to get to that here in a second. He is the author of the latest book to come out August 30th, 2022. The title of the book is My Daily Leadership, a Powerful Roadmap for Leadership Success. I'm joined today by Antonio Garrido, and he's going to be talking to us about his amazing book and insight. He's the author of this latest book and founder and president of My Daily Leadership, a leadership development organization with a mission to inspire 1 million, only 1 million of the world's best leaders to reach their full potential. He's working. He's going to start with 1 million. He's going to hit the other 7 billion or 8 billion. Is it 8 billion now? There you go. Plenty of time. Antonio has over 25 years in senior leadership positions with world-class businesses. He's an expert in leadership transformation, shaping high-performance leaders out of highly stressed and overworked leaders. Antonio blends his own vast commercial experience with proven techniques to embed a unique brand of leadership development. He's a serial entrepreneur, a successful business coach, charismatic speaker, and leader from small private businesses right up to Fortune 60 size. Welcome to the show, Antonio. How are you?
Hello, Chris. Gosh, there's so much to say about that introduction. I'm delicious. Thank you. What a great introduction. I got from that, not only do you have a high need for caffeine, but you also have a high need for approval. So it's probably like most leaders that we deal with, I suppose.
There you go. Yeah. And I was teasing you about inspiring 1 million. I mean, there's only so much time one guy has, for real. So.
Yeah, I thought we'd start modest. Modest goal. Yeah, exactly.
And it's like a marathon. You start with the first 1,000,000 miles, and then yeah, there you go. So welcome to the show. Congratulations on the new book. Give us your .com so people can look you up on the interwebs and find out more.
It couldn't be easier. It's mydailyleadership. So all the W's, mydailyleadership.com, all one word. Pop along, see what we have to say.
There you go. So you've launched this book, and what motivated you want to write this?
Oh, because of all of the leaders that we work with and helping them deal with their challenges, I suppose. I don't know how, I'm fairly ancient. So let's say 20 odd years ago, perhaps even more, a very enlightened leader of mine, my boss, right? Group chairman of a very large, complex organization, called me into his office one day. I'd only been with the company for two or 3 days, and asked me whether or not I journaled. And I said no. And he asked why, and I said, and I wasn't entirely really sure why, so I just said probably because I'm not a 16-year-old Victorian schoolgirl, right? Because I didn't know who else would journal other than those.
I'm not
right?
keeping a diary, damn it.
Exactly. Mr. Darcy was mean to me today, right? So I learned really quickly the value of this kind of self-reflection and the importance of journaling for doing that. So I have been journaling avidly for the longest time, and the more time we spent helping working with C-suite leaders from the small to the very, very big, B2B, B2C, all markets, all industries, and so on. I also realized that those that journal did much better than those that didn't. And I pulled those two things together, and I thought, hey, let's put a program together to help those that are serious about growing. And so we did, and it's been a rollicking good ride and a great success. So we've been very fortunate in that regard, I suppose. This is my third book, but I have to say this is probably my favorite book.
There you go. Well, they just get better with time, I think. The more you do it, and the longer you live, the more experience you have. So give us a synopsis of a 30,000 overview of the book and kind of what it entails, what's inside, and then we'll get into some of the deets as we go through the show.
Oh, I guess it's just as I mentioned in terms of, so many people, so many leaders really, want to be the best that they can be, or at least they claim to want that. And then when we ask them how much time did they spend trying to develop their self-awareness, how much time did they spend reflecting on their behaviors, their results, and it's staggeringly it's a disturbing and depressingly low number. And so so the principle of probably a good way to describe it is this. I did a talk not too long ago for 400 leaders around the world, all industries, all sizes, all of that kind of nonsense, and I asked them, by a show of hands, who here has no leadership blind spots, right? So fortunately enough, Chris, right, nobody put their hands up. So that was a good start. So I said, okay, terrific. So now that we know, so good self-awareness, round of applause for that. Now that we know that we do have some leadership blind spots, do me a favor, and could you just take a minute and write down for me what they are, right? And exactly, there's the problem. They don't know what they are. And here's the other thing that never happens, Chris, right? Nobody, let's say George, right? So nobody comes and knocks on George's door in the morning and says, hey, boss, you got 5 minutes? And George says, yeah, come in, sit down. What's on your mind? Open door policy. You know me. Yeah, George, I just wanted to let you know that I've been watching your performance over the last 6 months, and I think you're dreadful in nearly every regard. I think you're terrible at this and awful at that. And
have you been talking to my employees?
Right, exactly. And so when I always ask another supplementary question, like, what percentage of the time do you think your people are telling you the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Right? Because
I make them put their hand on the Bible.
Yeah, well, it's not 100. Neither is 0 or 1. But so when we wrap all of that up, and a comment that I loved from, we were talking presidents just earlier before we came on air, George Bush Sr. He was no longer the president, but you chaps still call ex-presidents Mr. President. But anyway, he was in a pro-am golf tournament, right? And he walked off the 18th green, and somebody shoved the camera into his face and said, "How was the golf, Mr. President?" And he thought for a second, and he said, "It's amazing how many games of golf he's lost since leaving the White House, right? Because, when you're the CEO, when you decide to pay rises, when you decide where people park in the car park, getting to that truth is difficult. So who's going to tell you?
Yeah.
Unless you take some kind of, objective, not subjective assessment, and start to build your self-awareness, and journaling is the best mechanism for doing that. Unless you do that, then you are doomed to, new day, same old nonsense, really, I suppose.
There you go. A lot to unpack there. We'll get to. Tell us about your hero's journey. What got you down this road? What got you interested in this field and writing about leadership and stuff? What's your journey of life that got you down this road?
So probably only interesting to me, my mother. But so when I came out of university, as I say, a million years ago, because I'm fairly ancient, I was an architect. So I was an architect for a little while. Much more by luck than judgment, I found myself running a tiny department of an organization, like a drawing office. And that department kind of oversells it. But, I thought that if I were to go into architecture, I'd be designing airports and cathedrals, all that kind of nonsense day in and day out. That wasn't the case. It was normally Mrs. Miggins' kitchen extension and so on. But anyway, it was slightly unfulfilling role, but I found myself in management fairly quickly. Wow. And then I continued to get promoted for, when I asked my CEO why he kept promoting me, he told me the reason. I might tell you the reason later if you're interested. But anyway, so I then found myself running a company, and then was poached. And I got to an organization, pretty large German organization, who said, "Hey, listen, if you want to get into the C-suite of this business, you need to go back to university and get an MBA, or architecture's fine, but strategic market management might be a bit better." So I went and did my second degree in that, and then because I was lucky enough to work for just outrageously inspired leaders. That's where my kind of, I was like, what's the difference between this chap and that chap? Why is this successful and not? So I worked for some great companies, I say Fortune 60 companies. And then about 12 or 14 years ago, I thought, I'll start my own company doing this. I almost said nonsense, but doing this stuff. It's the company that you and I were talking about before we came on in Miami. And that company just grew gangbusters. And that's really kind of sales and management and marketing and kind of sales leadership. And then I wrote this book and thought it's a separate brand. It's not the same thing. I didn't want to confuse stuff. So we started this business, which is exclusively leadership development. So that's my genesis, architecture to this. How it wasn't by design. The whole thing was an entire fluke. But, some of the best things are, I suppose.
And we learned so much as we go down the pathway. I'm sure there was things you learned as you went through, as you went up through the levels of management and stuff. So let's unpack some of the things that we talked about in your 30,000 overview. You talked about blind spots. Some people call them scotomas. The one thing I imparted to my niece and nephew when they turned 18 was there are three things that are very important in life: what you know you don't know. But the most important thing you got to figure out is the things you don't know. Because many times those will be the things that come at you like a freight train, as Metallica puts it, like a freight train coming your way, and you think it's a light in the end of the tunnel, and it's not. It's a freight train. And it's not going to be pretty. And so trying to identify those things. And so it's interesting. You sat down with CEOs and you asked them what their blind spots are. And then you talked about George Bush, where, sometimes you can be surrounded by yes men. One of the things that, I identified early on with my CEO, as I said, I remember going to one of my last CEOs that I worked for that finished off my training to be a CEO. And I said, you always have that one guy, Negative Nancy, who's on the board, and whatever he's always the the opposite dude, or the I want to say Altarian. Yeah, he's always the foil. Whatever. If you say right, he goes left. And it almost seems like he just goes left because you go right. Yeah. And then if you go left, he's going to right. And he said to me, Chris, it's really important to have that guy on the board, because the worst thing you do is surround yourself with yes men, and you don't know where the truth is. You don't know where the stuff is.
So can I tell you who first developed that principle?
Who?
If you're interested, through any military strategy.
We are.
It was Napoleon.
Oh.
No. So Napoleon, right? We were talking about short Frenchman just before we came on air as well, right? But Napoleon, who, did rather well in terms of, became self-acclaimed emperor of the world, but he controlled, or France controlled, getting on for a third of the world. Did France have more people than anybody else, more resources than anybody else, more horses than anybody else? No. But what Napoleon figured out, and it was genius, really, he figured out pretty early on that so let's imagine that there is an objective, right? So all CEOs have objectives, right? So Napoleon had an objective, and it may be to besiege a city, for example. He figured out pretty early that when he was in the tent, the forward tent, deciding how they were going to, enter the city and, rape the cattle and stampede the women, right? But whilst they were deciding how to do that, right, everyone kind of agreed with him. And he realized that everyone's agreeing with me because of who I am, as opposed to the genius, the proposition, the idea. So he took one of his generals, the nomenclature of it became the idiot general, and he sent them out to the tent. And then all of the other generals and he would put a plan together to besiege the city. Once the plan was fixed, they would then call the other general back, and one of the other generals would describe to that general, the idiot general, right, what the plan is. And he had no idea which components were whose idea, right? So he didn't know which bits Napoleon liked and which bits.
So he wasn't worried about pissing off the boss then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that single strategy, in terms of dealing with yes men and so on, that single strategy helped him conquer, a third of the world. So, it's difficult, because we talked also about what percentage of the time the leaders hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And they would like to think it's 100%, but I promise you it isn't. What everyone is telling the boss is a version of the truth that they think it's in their best interest to have him or her believe, right? And so one of the things that the leader has to do is close that truth gap. And how do they do that? Again, comes back to this EQ, and self-awareness has to be, you got to leave your ego. My partner in the Miami business, he's got a lovely expression about this, in terms of, having low ego, and in the military they say leave your stripes at the door, right? But he says, most leaders, they can either feed their ego or feed their kids, right? You can't have both. And I love that as an expression. I didn't put it in the book because that wasn't mine, but I now I've just said it out loud. I think I've put it in some social media posts.
There you go. Well, I mean, you can quote other people, as long as you have attribution.
Yeah. I just don't like giving him plaudits.
Okay. Well, we'll work that out on a separate podcast.
Yeah.
We'll bring the two of you in and have you work it out. So there you go. So one of the things I teased out in my intro was the epiphany you gave me when I was going through some of your stuff. As we talked about in the pre-show, I read some of your posts on LinkedIn, and so people can follow you over there. You have a great little following. I'm sorry, I don't mean to demean that. You have a great following over there. I meant that as like the comedy bit of it. On there, you talked about this journaling, and I journal. I know most successful does journal, but I never really put it together. And we'd had somebody earlier this week on the show where we were talking about leadership and being self-aware, and it hit me that journaling is one of the best ways to be self-aware or develop self-awareness. It's a constant road of achievement and getting to know yourself better. But if you're not self-actualized as a leader, I think you're going to suck. Am I wrong? Or you tell me more.
Well, you certainly won't reach your maximum potential, that's for sure. And then if you can't reach your maximum potential, then you can't help your people reach their maximum potential. And therefore, by default, you can't help your business reach its maximum potential. And your job as a leader is to future-proof yourself, right, and your organization. Because as Marshall Goldsmith says, one of our all-time business, gurus and heroes, what got you here won't get you there. And we know that the pace of change is ever faster, right? Mm-hmm. AI, the last 5 minutes, and before that, the internet, and before that, and before that, and all of that stuff. So,
it's moving faster, it seems too.
Faster and faster and faster. So the requirement then to future-proof ourselves is ever increasing. So we have to figure out, how do we maximize our potential? How do we develop our people to maximize their potential? And then how do we maximize? Because what's a leader's job is to make decisions and to future-proof the business. That's what they get paid for, right? And the way they do that is to maximize themselves, their people, and by default their business. It's not only their job, that's their responsibility. And if they're not prepared to do that, in my view, and it's harsh, then they should go do something else. And the leaders that ask us to work with them but are not prepared to make that kind of investment in themselves, we don't help them because they don't mean it. And any leader that says that they are genuinely interested in developing themselves and their people and their organization, and they don't journal, don't believe them, and they're not prepared to either, then don't believe them. So it's just BS.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, it's something where if you're not self-aware, self-actualized, I always tell people being an entrepreneur will change you if you let it, and if you really have to work hard. Unless you have a bunch of money and you don't have to develop yourself, I suppose you can isolate yourself with money. And we see people that fail with sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars or sometimes billions of dollars in investments. There's been some recent massive tech failures that had so much money, it was stupid, and they still couldn't make success. I'm thinking of things like Clubhouse. There was a pizza company that was going to do mobile pizza delivery, mobile pizza making in trucks, and then deliver them, so they would be steaming hot right off the truck. And I think they had close to $1 billion, and they failed. But let's talk about and delve into this a little bit. When with journaling, how does one develop the insight to take and journal? And do you really need to not focus when you're journaling on other people? Like I used to come home and tell stories about my employees, like, you won't believe what Bob did today. Or does it more need to be more internalized, where you go, hey, what did I do today, and how can I do better?
Good question. So this insight piece, and so many organizations are actually recruiting leaders now specifically for insight, others for EQ, where in the past we always thought it was IQ and technical skill, and maybe even time served, but it's none of those things anymore. The best of the best companies are looking for this ability to see between the numbers and wood for the trees and emotional intelligence and all that kind of stuff. But before I tell you that, can I give all of your listeners a quick exercise to do?
Please do.
Yeah. So, because I like to give theory as well as practical application, and I'll tell a super quick story. Then I promise I'm going to come back to this. How do we develop insight? I promise. So, So the same chap that I told you about 1 million years ago, who said, "Do you journal?" and I said, "No, because I'm not a 16-year-old Victorian." Okay, that one. So then I was on the journaling, process. I was like most of our clients that would ask us, well, what do we write and how often and what, and we would if we knew what to write and all that kind of stuff. That's the least of it, and we give everybody all of that. So we make it a very light load, but it's an everyday load, just like brushing your teeth. But anyway, so he said this, and here's what I'd like all of your viewers and listeners to think about, your audience to think about. So this group chairman asked me into his office again. This is one of my very inspirational leaders, and he said, "Hey, Antonio," he said, "have you ever worked for a dreadful boss?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I have. Hasn't everybody?" He said, yeah, probably. So then he got himself a piece of paper and a pen. And he said, will you just write down, what does leadership dreadfulness look like? What does a dreadful boss look like? Characteristics, 5 or 6. So I wrote down 5 or 6 things that I could imagine most of your audience are thinking. Maybe you're inconsistent, plays favorites, micromanagers, hot and cold, plays whatever, right? Not strategic, everything's tactical, reactive, not responsive, all of those things, right? So I wrote a list of things, gave that back to him, and he said, yeah, terrific, write some more, right? Slid the piece of paper back. So I wrote some more things of leadership dreadfulness, and then, passed it back, and he passed it back again. He said, write me some more. So anyway, long story short, I got to about 15 things that in my view were like, the most dreadful things that leaders could do. He said, that's a really good list. I love it. That's really, really good. He said, now will you do me a favor? I said, yeah. He said, whilst ever you are the CEO or managing director there, but it's the CEO, the principal is the same. Whilst ever you're the CEO of this organization, can you promise me you'll never do any of the things on that piece of paper? Right. And I went, well, I'll try. He says, no, just don't ever do any of those things. I said, okay. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, carry it with you at all times. Whenever I see you in the corridor or pass you in the canteen or whatever, he said, get that list out and we'll have a conversation about some of those things. So that started my, this insight that you were talking about, this self-awareness, this reflective and reflexive practice. He then asked me another question. And this is the point to it. Then I'll tell you where the insight comes from, right? Mm-hmm. He said, ask yourself 2 questions every day. He said, I ask myself 2 questions every day. The 2 questions are, did I earn my money today? And did I try my best? Not did I do my best? Because he said, no, you almost never do your best. Doing your best is the 100-meter runner that every single day when he practices and trains, he gets a personal best. I mean, that's just impossible, right? But did I earn my money today? And did I try my best? Here's what happens. When you start to, and he said, if there are ever 3 consecutive days where you think you haven't earned your money, he said, can you come and talk to me and we'll chat about that? It's sort of very, very kind of veiled threat, like you'll soon find yourself on the job market, right?
Wow.
So I said,
I like this guy.
Yeah. Oh, I love this guy. So here's why I think I did, I tried my best today and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And he goes, no, that's nonsense, right? So he said this. He said, look, when you start saying, did I earn my money today? Did I try my best today? Not did I do my, did I try my best today? When you start asking yourself that question every day, what then happens, Chris, is you go, well, you know what? I'll give myself an A- for today, because when I said this, maybe I could have said that. When I did this, maybe I could have done that. Perhaps I could have said that or done that or not, right? Maybe I could have done this better. What that then does, Chris, is it starts to build that self-awareness muscle that we talked about. But unfortunately, it's all in the rearview mirror. It's retrospective, right? It's hindsight. Yeah. Now, the thing about when you do that hindsight analysis with enough frequency and with enough seriousness, right? When you constantly look back, what then happens is before too long, Chris, somebody asks you a question in the moment, in the present, and asks you, hey, boss, what should we do about this? What do you think we should do about that? Right? And oh, crikey, I'm going to have to review my answer in about 4 hours, right? When I get to my journal, right? So you think to yourself, do you know what? I'm going to give a world-class leaders. What would a world-class leader say to this, right? Or how would they respond to this? And so you go from a hindsight to in the moment insight. Now, when you do that with enough frequency, what then happens is you develop foresight, right? So hindsight, insight, foresight. And that foresight allows you to just see the tiny piece of the iceberg peeking above the waves, right? And knowing that there's like all of this stuff below, and you're the Titanic, and you think, okay, let's course correct now, rather than when this issue becomes too big, and it leads to foresight. So hindsight, insight, foresight, and we have our program addresses that specifically and does that specifically. But it's interesting to think, what does dreadful look like? And when you define dreadful, it makes you start kind of define what does gorgeous look like, right? And then you can start to, well, how do I measure against that? And how could I get closer to that? And and good things happen.
There you go. And this is the journey that I think more leaders need to go on, because we talked about in the pre-show. I've heard of, I think there's a famous baseball player who would literally keep a library of swings, not just his swings, but he would have all the top players' swings recorded on video cassette or something. And he would watch them, how they would hold their arms, how they would hold their elbows, how they would swing, how they would approach the ball, and all the mechanics of the thing. And we've had Olympic coaches on the show, and everyone's talked about, all the coaching that they do for people and trying to develop self-awareness of just integral parts. In fact, there's extensive scientist stuff they do with the science that they do with the Olympic things, where they'll cover them in nodes and do like a computerized thing of how they're utilizing their body. But a lot of times when I ask CEOs, in my experience, what is your leadership style? How do you lead? What are the core natures of your leadership attributes? They have no idea. They're just like running on whatever. And I know they have a little bit of a toolbox that they use, and it kind of works for them, if they will. But I don't, a lot of them are just like, I don't know. I just get blister. I don't know what it is. Is that what you find as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk like all of the time. And here's an interesting statistic, or here's an interesting fact that surprises most leaders when we first tell them. And it relates to, you were talking about sports, for example, but it's the same in many, it can be entertainment. It doesn't just have to be sports. So the military, for example, are world class at this kind of stuff. And so let's take Top Gun as an example. When I'm talking about this evaluated experience. So the place, not the film, right? So there is, for those that don't know, Top Gun is a movie, but it's actually based on a real place called Top Gun. And Top Gun, what do you imagine they train them? What's the purpose of Top Gun, Chris? Because it isn't to teach them how to fly a plane, right? Because they know how to fly a plane. They wouldn't be there unless they were the best of the best of the very, very, very best. So they know how to fly a plane. So it's not that. What do you imagine they do in Top Gun? The real place, not the movie. What do you imagine they do?
You tell us. You tell us.
Okay. Well, so here's the thing.
I didn't watch the movie, so I'm kind of out. I never saw Top Gun.
It's nothing like the movie, but so let's imagine then we've got some pilots, and they're being briefed before a training event or before an event, and they'll say, okay, you're going to come in, you'll enter theater at this speed, this altitude, this height, and you'll enter at this speed and this bearing and this height, and then go, and then we'll just try and have a dogfight and see who wins, right? And then they go and do that thing, and then they'll come back and land, and they'll talk about it. They'll review it. They will do an assessment. They'll do a debrief. So the actual dogfighty thing that they do, right, is it's normally about just 3 or 4 minutes. It's not hours. It's just 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 or 6 minutes maximum. And then they go back and talk about it, and they debrief and they assess. How long do you imagine they assess the 4 or 5 minutes? What do you think?
I know the answer to this. They do it as long as it takes to debrief, but usually it's about 45 minutes to an hour. It's
45 minutes to an hour for every minute. So if it's a 4-minute thing, it's like the whole of the rest of the day. They'll fly for 4 minutes, and then they'll review for the whole of the 45 minutes for every minute.
It's true. They pick it apart, and even the leaders admit they're wrong, and the non-leaders it's open forum where the non-leaders can criticize the leader and go, hey, at this point in our flight path, you fucked this up. And everybody, it's like a self-accountability sort of meeting.
It's exactly that. And so when was the last time the CEO did that? I asked the CEO just last week. So tell me about your annual board meeting. How did that go with all of your shareholders? He went, oh, really, really well. I said, okay, what makes you say that? He went, well, because this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. I said, all right, terrific. I said, when you think back over that board meeting, whose voice do you remember hearing more than anybody else? You know what? And he goes, well, mine. I said, okay.
Yeah. I was on stage barking at them. Yeah. That's how most shareholder meetings go.
Yeah.
Right.
So what did you learn? I asked. And he went, coffee. Anybody want a coffee? Right. It's just this self-awareness. Honestly, Chris, you would think that the great and the good and these people who have been, running the largest, most complex organizations in the world, you would think that they are the Lionel Messis of the world, right? But you said, baseball players, they watch hours and hours of film of themselves and others, right? Same in football, same in soccer, same in tennis, same everywhere, same in Top Gun. Why don't leaders intentionally build their self-awareness more? All they think is, well, what I'm doing so far, it got me here, right? It got me here, so I can't be that dreadful. And of course they're not. But the issue is, do you want to be okay? And I'll often say this before we even train, coach, take on any client, we'll ask them this question. Do you want to be okay? Do you want to be good? Do you want to be above average? Do you want to be best in class, or do you want to be world class? What do you want to be? And if they don't say world class or best in class, we won't take them on, right? Because they don't have that appetite. They won't put in the reps. They are not prepared to get far enough outside their comfort zone. And you and I both know, Chris, that there's no growth in your comfort zone and there's no comfort in your growth zone. So unless you're prepared to get comfortable being uncomfortable, this isn't for you, right? Go to the tennis club and get yourself a prawn sandwich and enjoy it. Put your feet up.
Can you give us that line again? Because that was a great epiphany and a great little axiom.
About there's no growth in your comfort zone and there's no comfort in your growth zone. But it's true, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not prepared, because we all know that magic happens outside your comfort zone, right? So, and so what a lot of leaders do is, that because of ego, right? They don't want to take too many risks. They don't want to be. Brene Brown. If anybody's watched Dare to Lead with Brene Brown, where she has said that the best leaders have the courage to say, I don't know, I'm not sure, help, what do you think, right? And those are the best ones because they have enough professional humility to say, I don't have to know everything. And they're brave enough to say, help. And those are the best. Those are the ones that we help.
One of the most important things I learned at a very young age, I can't remember who it was that turned me on to this knowledge, but Henry Ford, they tried to take away his company because he had a fourth grade education when it became successful. And the board, I think it was the board of directors and other people were like, hey, this guy's, not the brightest. Let's try and take his company from him. And he appeared in, according to the way the story was told to me, he appeared in court. And from the stand, they're asking him, how is it that you think you're smart enough to run, this very successful company that you've now built? And he said, I don't know everything. He goes, but I have a little a pad or something, some sort of device, electronic device on my desk. And I have all these experts that I've surrounded myself with. And any question that I want an answer for, I can push a button and that person will come in and answer my questions or give me the data I need. So the communication was, I don't need to know everything and I need to be self-aware that I don't know everything, but I need to have access to the knowledge and insight when I need it.
Whenever a CEO thinks they're the smartest guy in the room, they got problems.
I learned a long time ago, man, I do not have the corner on all the great ideas. I have some.
Chris, you'd be staggered about how many of them think they are the smartest. You're flabbergasted.
It's an easy buy-in because you're the leader and people worship you. And if you're not careful, you can get caught up in the egotism of it. And then you start making all the wrong decisions. And then, you suddenly, nothing's working and you're like, and the mirror is staring at you and you can try laying off people, but sometimes after you lay it off enough people, it becomes really obvious where everyone's going like, well, you fired everyone and everything still sucks. So it could be you.
My coach is a fourth generation submarine commander. So he was a commander of a nuclear submarine. His father was a diesel submarine, and his father a diesel, and his son is actually in the Navy. I mean, talk about pressure. But anyway, so he one of our very, very first sessions, he asked me this. He said, "Hey, question for you, Antonio." He said, "Well, there was we were about 4 months from Baltimore."
Mm-hmm.
We were under the Arctic Circle, or around the Arctic Circle. We've been about 4 months tracking red submarines across the globe. That's kind of Chinese and Russian submarines, whilst ever trying to remain undetected. So that's what they were doing. They were just tracking submarines whilst ever remaining undetected. That was their goal at this particular time. And he said it was 4 a.m. in the morning, 4 months underway. I was asleep in my quarters. And he said, unfortunately, an 18-year-old, a young chap, a welder, 4 a.m., had an accident whilst he was welding, and he electrocuted himself and died almost instantly.
Oh, no.
And I went, gosh, that's okay, terrible. He said, yeah, terrible. Whose fault? And I went, he said, well, before you answer, let me give you some options.
Mm-hmm.
Is it his fault, or was it his fault? Was it the person that asked him to do that at 4 a.m.? Was it the person that trained him? Was the person that's supposed to be accompanying him? Was it the person who's in watch? Was it whose fault was it? And I said, I feel that it was his fault, but I also feel that it was your fault. He said, it was entirely my fault.
Wow.
Because it's my submarine. And I said,
yeah.
You were asleep? And he went, yeah, I was asleep. But when I take on the role, when I assume the captain's, I accept responsibility for anything that happens on this ship, right? And I go, oh, cool. So when we say, coming back to your point, right? So when we say to a CEO, how many people report to you? Let's just imagine a number. And I say, okay, well, you probably got 20% standard deviation bell chart, 20% A players, 60% B players, 20% C players. Name me a C player. And I go, Frank. Give me another C player. George. How long has Frank been with you? 6 years. How long has George been with you? 4 years. Anybody else? Yeah, probably Mary. How long has Mary been with you? Yeah, about 9 months. And I'll say, okay, cool. Tell me this. Did you hire them like that, or have you made them like that? Right? These C players, right? And then they'll go, oh, I don't know. I said, well, so whose fault is it that they're here? And they'll go, probably HR. And I'll go, no, right? It's your submarine. And then I'll go, tell me about the numbers. He said, yeah, we're a bit behind this year. So whose fault is that? And I go, CRO. I go, no, it's your submarine. It's not the chief revenue officer. How are you doing with, you're on time in full? Yeah, we're about 84%. What should you be? 90%. Whose fault's that? Manufacturing director. No, it's your submarine, right? So how can, and so many leaders, they think they are A-star players, but they're surrounded by B players. And I say, you only get an A-star when all of your people get an A-star.
Yeah,
when
there you go.
All get an A-star, you do. And until they do, you don't. And that's your job. And that's one of these epiphanies, which is like, oh, I guess it's my submarine. I guess everything that happens here is my responsibility. So if I want the world to get better, I better look in the mirror before I start handing out.
There you go. I love that analogy. I'm going to put that on my wall. It's my, it's my submarine or my
but
submarine.
It is. Who else?
It is. The buck stops here. I used to keep something on my desk that basically inferred that just because you have a title doesn't mean anything, and that you've got to earn that every day. And yeah, people don't realize the buck stops here. The leader sets the tone from the top down. And I mean, and also not only sets the tone, because you can put a bunch of BS mission statements and, all sorts of PR, but unless you live it, work it, deliver it, and set an example to people, because people see through your BS. I mean, I tell this, whether your leader is a parent, your child sees your BS, if you tell your child don't lie and then you lie to them, well, yeah, they're like, mom and dad's full of shit. Same thing with a leader.
And how many leaders, sorry, it's going to crush you there, that, people will watch what you do much more than they listen to what you're saying. How many leaders judge themselves by their intentions, but everyone else by their actions, right? How many?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, we mentioned George W. Bush Sr. earlier, and he was an interesting and amazing man, especially when I saw him in his later years, almost 90, jumping out of airplanes. I'm like, man, I haven't jumped out of an airplane. I'm young. This guy's got more going on than I do. But a good funny example is when he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and then he did something completely different. It didn't work out too well in real life.
No.
And it's cited as one of the things that sunk him. So
there were no new taxes. He just put all the other tax rates up. I mean, there were no new ones, right?
Oh, that's true. Yeah. It didn't also help the economy kind of tanked right at the same time. But people, that really stuck with people. That was one of the things they found that stuck with them. And people watch how you act, and that's why it's important to be self-aware as we come around full circle with that, because if people are watching how you act and you're not aware of how your performance and the standards and morals and ethics and emotional intelligence you talk about in the book, then that. We're running out of time on the show as we approach the hour, but I want to tease out a few things on your book, and I'll let you decide if you want to tease out any of those as we go, but I want people to know about them because I found them incredibly interesting. You talk about in your book about aligning with 5 core elements of exceptional leadership. You talk about the 3 C's of alignment, from conversation to collaboration, identifying your blind spots, et cetera, and 20 critical performance competencies that leaders need to future-proof themselves. Any final thoughts as we go out that you want to tease out? But people should definitely pick up the book so they can dive into the rest of that.
The really nice question. Thank you. I think I would say a couple of things, and I don't want these to sound like trite kind of throwaway words that you can put on a coaster, right? But one of the things I'd like your audience to think about is, what's the difference between leading and managing? Now, we have a model in the book, and please do, it talks about those 20 competencies and those 5 pillars about company development, self-development, and so on, right? So they're all there, and it's a really, really great model for leadership, and we have a tremendous, terrific assessment to measure yourself against that. Benchmark yourself against the best of the best, and then deal with the gaps, right? We don't have to deal with them, but at least figure out where you are in the game. But I'll ask leaders, what's the difference between leading and managing? And the answer is surprisingly weak most of the time. So let me give you a quick definition of those things. So management is the use of directed authority, and it's delegating tasks. And you've seen it a million times where someone will say, well, why don't you tell him this? Or perhaps you could do this, try this and see if that works. And even if you do it with a really good nurturing parent tonality and say, well, I don't know, but maybe you want to try that, right? Mm-hmm. That's still managing, because it's the use of directed authority. And it makes it very difficult for somebody to say, actually, George, I'm going to go do something else, right? Because you're the boss and you decide, who gets the parking spot and what happens at the next salary review. So a lot of people think they're leading when all they're doing is managing with a nice tonality, because it's the use of directed authority and delegating tasks. But leadership is the use of directed influence, and it's delegating results. So you don't have to micromanage everything. Just lead by manage by exception, lead by exception. So delegate really well. So many leaders think they're great delegators. They're not. They just bark orders at people and think that's tremendous delegation, right? But it really isn't.
Yeah.
So
you've been talking to my employees again, huh? Yeah.
What's that?
You've been talking to my employees again, huh? I've been barking orders at people.
The ones that felt brave enough to answer my email. Yeah.
Off with their heads.
Off with their heads, right? Alice in Wonderland, terrific. The other thing I would then say is this, as a last point. Collaboration. We've got to go from conversation, communication, coordination, right? We've got to get to collaboration. And if you want to know if there's anybody watching this, I have genuinely no axe to grind. I've got no horse in this race. Learn about how the man that saved Lego, right? Everybody loves Lego. Lego were almost about to go to the wall. And then they got an outside CEO, wasn't a family guy like the Henry Ford thing, right? Wasn't a Lego guy, saved Lego based on this principle of collaboration. When you as a leader can set up a collaborative culture where everybody works for, and everyone's trying to help everybody, and people in the C-suite will share their resources with other people. I saw a great example not too long ago. There was a company whose sales were a little bit behind. And so therefore logistics was a little bit behind. They were a bit quieter than they would have been. And the guy that heads up logistics said to the sales guy, hey, listen, things are a bit quiet for us at the moment. I've got 8 men. I can give you 5. If I gave you 5 of my men, what could they do to help the sales function to get us all busy again, or the marketing function? And that's collaboration, where it's like, how can I help you? And how can we share resources? And all that silos, let's break down all of that kind of BS. So learn what the difference is between leading and managing, manage by exception, and generate a collaborative culture, and you'll do better.
There you go. And I know the stories you're talking about with Lego. In fact, the collaboration with the Lego movie people, and how they did that, that helped really reignite the brand, is an amazing story in of itself. And they literally gave them free reins to do whatever, but the collaboration they used to get them to communicate and incorporate the brand into those movies, that just made them, just such a huge success and revitalize them, was an amazing story as well. So this has been really insightful.
Excellent. I'm sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
There you go, Antonio. This is really insightful. We could spend another 3 hours going through your book, but we want people to buy it. I mean, it's a tease out, people. You got to go buy the book to get the deets, as the kids say. I don't know if the kids say that. I just made that up. There you go. So Antonio, thank you very much for coming on the show. Give us your .com so people can find you on the interwebs, please.
Yeah, so it's all the W's, mydailyleadership.com, and you can find My Daily Leadership, the book, on Amazon. If you download the audio, it's me narrating it. If you want to hear my jokes in my accent, then give that a whirl too. If you want to, but whatever you do. 5-star review on Amazon would be very much appreciated.
There you go. And what's the best way to people that are interested in working with you, maybe having you coach them or give them some advice? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, and genuinely, please do. So it's Antonio at mydailyleadership.com. So it's Antonio, Antonio at mydailyleadership.com. And I promise within 72 hours, somebody, more than likely me, because Alice will kill me otherwise if I don't, but I'll get back to you personally and see how I can help.
There you go. Well, thank you, Antonio, for coming on the show. Thanks to my audience for tuning in. Order the book wherever fine books are sold. As we teased out, there's a whole mess of stuff we didn't even get to cover in the show or touch on, because it's just jam-packed with data and information to make you a better leader. August 30th, 2022, it came out, My Daily Leadership, a powerful roadmap for leadership success. And like I said, order it where fine books are sold. Also, guilt and shame time for the plugs. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Refer it to your family and friends. 5-star review on iTunes. LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss. Chris Voss 1 on TikTok. And I think YouTube is in there as well. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.
Ta-ta.